Hello and welcome to Diminishing Returns.
No, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong, Alan.
Oh, what? Are you
You've got to start by going, thanks for listening to today's show.
And it should be in black and white.
Join us next week when we'll be picking up Christopher Nolan's season with The Prestige.
Yeah, it's very
And then
good.
next week we should do a completely different film. That's the twist.
Oh dear. Yeah, so as that very clever and funny satire will have told you, this week is the first part of a trilogy in which we look at the entire filmography of Christopher Nolan.
Ooh.
I'm Alan, with me as always is Sol.
Hello.
And joining us this week to look at the first 4 films of Christopher Nolan is Paul Brear.
Hello.
Hello. Brear's been on the show before. Looked at Fight Club with us, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And I saw lots of Kevin Smith.
Oh, yes. And this is another set of films for men. Entirely aimed at a male demographic. Yeah, so just to summarise immediately, we will be looking at Following, a very low-budget little film that Christopher Nolan made to start his career, the breakout indie hit Memento, we're testing if you've got what it takes to be a proper studio director, Insomnia, and then the beginning of the Dark Knight trilogy, Batman Begins. That's what we're looking at this week in chronological order.
But do you remember, Alan? I remember way back when, I remember we had a conversation about Chris Nolan where I was reading that he doesn't believe in shot lists because it's all up here in his head.
Yeah, but that's a fucking delight to work with.
That's
Wally
what I
Pfister
mean.
loves that. That's why he only ever works with Wally Pfister. No one else will do it. Yeah, God. I see. The thing is, okay, let's do a bit of overview of Christopher Nolan then, just to get us into this. Obviously, a very competent director in terms of what he's producing, and I feel like he's got a bit of a reputation as making kind of intellectual films.
Yeah, films that you have to
to get,
whether it's true or not.
Yeah, as far as the mainstream goes, you know, he's no Ingmar Bergman, but
yeah, within obviously within the relative context of Hollywood cinema, and I think that's true to an extent. I think you're getting something a little bit more than just a
he's not making Transformers
action
is he?
nonsense. Yeah, exactly. But does that make him a good writer or a good director or a bit of both? What good storyteller?
I think he's an extremely. I mean, I'll just say it now. I think he's a phenomenal filmmaker, and I would say that largely comes more down to direction than writing. But that's not to dismiss his writing out of hand. He
does write, or at least do this ending screenplay of most of the things that he directs, doesn't he? He's certainly involved in the writing process of pretty much everything he does.
Yeah, he gets his hands on it. Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about this later, but just speaking in terms of that, obviously Insomnia, which we'll be looking at today, was a remake of another film, and although he's not credited as a writer, he did, like I say, he did his kind of pass on it. And so I've watched the original Insomnia as well, so we can talk a little bit later about what did Christopher Nolan bring to that story that wasn't there originally.
Fucking nerd. You see, yeah. I was so annoyed at the prospect of having to rewatch all of these films because I just wasn't in the mood. Not that I disliked them, I just wasn't in the mood. I thought I'd find a kind of way to subvert it in one way or another. So you've already ruined that for me, Alan, because I didn't rewatch Christopher Nolan's Insomnia. I just watched the original Swedish film that I hadn't seen before. But
I hadn't seen that before either. That's good. We can discuss that. I also read the short story by Jonathan Nolan.
I was just about to say that I read the short story instead.
You see, I'm beating you all.
Get a job.
This is good. That's good, though. We'll discuss all that later.
I didn't actually read the short story. I was just going to say that I
had. Right, so basically, we're going to start with Following. Now, as far as I can tell, I read a little bit about this. Christopher Nolan didn't go to film school. He just sort of...
Did he not?
Learned. No, I read something...
I thought you met his wife at film school, didn't he?
I read something, and it might have been totally just speculative nonsense, but basically said he studied English or something at university, but joined the filmmaking society and just kind of learned on the fly doing like that.
Right.
Rather than a specific film. I mean, he may have then gone on to do some sort of film course, I don't know, but like he didn't go to film school as such. Or that's what I read anyway.
You are right, yeah. It says here, Schools Film Society. I think I listened to like his Desert Island Discs or something like that, and he said he met his wife on the set of a student film or something. So yeah, that must be what he was talking about.
But that does kind of make things all the more impressive when you look at this very early effort following that he made. Although, having said that, I think he was about 28 when he made this, so presumably several years passed. He's probably making short films and stuff. It's obviously something he was getting into. Because it is competently directed, I think, considering it's obviously just a completely zero budget type affair.
I think it's an extremely confident debut.
Yeah.
To say it's obviously incredibly low budget and reminiscent of the likes of Clerks that we discussed last time you were on the show, Brear.
There's very little about this film that makes me think this. It doesn't feel like a student film or anything like. It doesn't feel like someone's got 5-6 grand, and I enjoyed it. Everything worked as a whole. It didn't. I don't maybe see directors as you two do, and I don't look into it as much. But I can see when something is badly directed, definitely.
Yeah.
And there's nothing about this jumps out as this is terrible, this is badly put together. For a first film is amazing, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, I think it doesn't feel like a student production at all, but it does feel like something that has been scraped together on nothing, but, has been done so incredibly well. It feels like people who are working to their limitations and completely understand what those limitations are.
I mean, you've got very few characters, but it's all shot pretty on the fly. I understand they just sort of filmed it on weekends, because everyone had a day job. I presume no one got paid because the budget didn't have money to actually pay the actual
film,
just
the
paying
actual
your film
physical film itself was
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think this looks, although you look at this and you can tell it's just kind of a little bit thrown together by people with no money. It looks like more than it is, if you know what I mean. They've obviously done the best they could with what they've got, and that's what you're looking for in terms of, first film by a low budget filmmaker. You're looking, can I give this person more money and they'll do something with it?
Yeah. The only real giveaway is the acting quality. Is just obviously that of we've done the best we can with.
It's not.
It feels like they're getting the best out of unknown actors rather than.
Yeah,
it feels like
says a great deal about the direction that he's getting so much out of them. It doesn't feel like these people can't act. Like Al said, it just feels like they're to their limits. This is probably the best they can ever do.
Yeah, they're probably a bit more inexperienced, and they're probably working under difficult circumstances, as in, shooting over several months or whatever, like one day at a time. But I think apart from, there's a couple of moments where you go, that wasn't particularly great acting, but generally speaking, it holds up completely. And like most of these actors that I could see haven't really done anything else. But
no, they've all got following as like their top.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be surprised if I'd seen them on like The Bill or whatever. It's like that kind of working actors.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other big giveaway as well is just that this film is an incredibly sleek 69 minutes long, which is so refreshing in this day and age. Oh god, it's so nice just to have a nice 69-minute film.
The basic plot is that we follow a guy who's a bit of a kind of a weird guy, like a writer. He's lost in his own head a little bit in his fantasy world of he's just kind of following people around. Eventually follows the wrong person, and this guy says, "What the hell are you doing? Why are you following me?" They team up, and this guy he's met teaches him how to be a burglar, I guess.
Just in case there's any ambiguity there, that's not a metaphorical following. He's literally just walking around behind people, shadowing them, just to get a sense of how they live their lives. And
he's got this kind of romantic idea of being a writer that he wants to study people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but you're right. It very quickly descends into just let's burgle people.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he kind of teams up with this very charismatic kind of gentleman thief who breaks into people's houses and does stuff. And it doesn't exactly fly as realism, but it's okay. And then we delve further into this increasingly complex plot of kind of double crosses and intrigue of there's a femme fatale who wants him to do something for her, but then is it really about something else? And that's kind of the one thing that jumped out to me as sort of, this is classic Nolan right there from the beginning. It's kind of twisty-turny plot, but also told in a non-linear fashion. We do keep jumping the timelines, which in this particular case does seem to mostly just allow for a sort of a big plot twist reveal to come nearer the end, when chronologically it would have to come earlier. It's kind of when we find out the guy is working with the woman and all that sort of stuff. But it does work in terms of it just makes it a little bit more intriguing, a little bit more confusing. I don't think in this case it particularly needed it. I think you could tell this plot linearly and it'd be fine.
This is perhaps... let's get into it now rather than Memento. The whole non-linear thing, I remember at film school, Alan, you may remember in a writing lecture, I remember us being given a script to read as a sort of homework, and we were going to dissect it in class. And it was about a kind of bank robbery and a little kid like walking down the street outside or something with a toy car. Anyway, I hated it. And my main takeaway, that like the thing was told completely non-linear, but it was just completely arbitrary. It was a really dull, uninteresting story that wouldn't be interesting in a linear capacity, and then they just told it out of order to try and artificially create some sense of suspense or drama. And I remember the writing teacher that we had basically saying, this is an excellent script. It's excellent because they tell it out of order and that makes it interesting, and it wouldn't be otherwise. And I was just sort of flabbergasted, like, well, that's bad then, isn't it? Like, you should only...
You should add something because it adds something, not... It shouldn't be the main plot, is that, exactly, it's out of order, so you're confused.
Otherwise, you could just take... I mean, I keep using it, it's an easy example of a film to bash, but otherwise you could just take Transformers and stick the last 20 minutes at the beginning and, suddenly that's a well-written film, is it? I don't know.
I don't know about that. I mean, I think it's fine to mess with the structure and play with it and make your story more interesting through that. But you still need to have something there in the first place.
I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying that I think it is a crutch. It is a gimmick, and it is, generally speaking, it can be quite a cheap thing to do. And I think that Christopher Nolan is largely very justified when he uses this technique, in the films he's telling have a thematic justification for it, which I suppose we'll get into in the subsequent films where he uses the same technique. Yeah. But I agree, it's not hugely justified here. It just makes something that would otherwise not be as interesting a little bit more interesting, but it's quite a cheap way of doing it.
It does just feel like, but I think because of the nature of what the film is, it's a totally no budget thing made by people who are kind of making their first film. I feel a bit more like, do you know what? You're doing something quite ambitious there. Yeah. Forgiving, and also the fact that they pull it off just goes, that takes some talent.
I do think it's an interesting enough story in its own right as well, and it's like you say, it's a low budget film, first time writer, but it's, even if you did do it in a linear form, I still think it would be a reasonable film that they made, and it's just adding something extra. It's not just, that's not the be all and end all of the film.
Yeah, I agree.
And I mean, I will say, from a practical point of view, I think it's done quite nicely in the sense that, we have these kind of different periods where we're jumping between, but like at one point he gets his hair cut and has a shave, another point he kind of gets beaten up, he's all bruised. So it's like we immediately kind of go, okay, this is the timeline we're in. That's quite nice.
It's like sliding doors, isn't it? She gets a haircut right at the start, so you know which one you're watching.
But that's okay. That's a nice subtle way of just flagging it up without having to make it too obvious.
Yeah. Well, you know, that I think that speaks to Christopher Nolan's style as a director. I think he is first and foremost a technical director, if you know what I mean. I think he is a master of the logistics and details like that when it comes to filmmaking. That seems to be his strength. And maybe he is not as good at characters and emotion and things like that. We'll get into, I suppose, a bit later. But he is phenomenal at that kind of how is the audience going to read this? How is this going to be conveyed kind of detail? Yeah,
you're right. And it's very plot-driven things. Character-driven. And speaking of that, in following, I did notice like when we meet the burglar, like one of the first things he's doing is basically kind of giving a philosophical justification of burglary. It's like, you know, you take something away from someone and then they'll learn how important it is to them or what's important to them. It did remind me of Fight Club, actually, because they do something similar in that. Like, you know, the Project Mayhem thing is a bit like that. But, you know, when they go and
the guy at the convenience shop.
Yeah, he puts the gun to him and all that.
Yeah.
It reminded me of that. It was the same kind of time. Was it 99, something like that? It's similar sort of period. 98 it was. Yeah, it was the same year as Fight Club. So I don't know if that was just sort of tapping into something like that. It does feel a bit wanky, I guess is the word I'm trying to...
I did think that when I was watching it, like, if this was handled just a tiny bit worse, it could be the most insufferable bit of pretentious student shit. But it's just done well enough that it works. And
it does kind of...
bored with it.
It pays off to an extent that the character that's doing those things does turn out to be basically a total shit, and also deliberately misleading this other guy.
Absolutely.
So it kind of works on that level. But yeah, you're right. It is only like a hair's breadth away from being total bullshit.
Yeah.
But that's good. That's okay. They fell on the right side of the line. That's fine.
I think for me it worked quite well in the sense that this guy made absolutely no sense at all. In that he was clearly not short of money. He was stealing absolute shit from people's houses that wasn't worth anything to sell. That didn't make any sense at all. So how has he got money? My main question was, where was he getting actual money from? Which obviously towards the end of it was answered. Yeah. It was just philosophical bullshit to reel this guy in. Yeah. Who is a bit of a dreamer and a writer and will fall for that kind of bollocks. Yeah, for me, it's not something he was trying to push.
So it's nice. It kind of calls itself in its own bullshit, sort of, in a way. It all comes round. It works. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some Nolan features there, that kind of twisty-turny plot. Did you also notice the Batman logo in the film?
I did. It's under the door of the writer, isn't it?
Yeah, it's on his on his flat, on the door of his flat. Strange little...
Quite a clever way to get a number of different scenes out of the same sets as well, locations. Obviously, they burgle two houses that are also used for other things. It's like a nice way of just limiting everything on that budget. They only really go 4 places, I think, and 3 of them are used as both burglary scenes and then scenes for other things because of the way the story works.
There was one thing I noticed where they break into a house and they sort of smash a window pane in the door and lock it. Yeah. And, and they walk through and you can tell it's a real door, in a real house. And I did think, that's proper budget. Like, you've got to pay to replace that window now. Like, they've really committed to that because usually they just find the key under the mat. And then later on in the film, where it transpires that this is a sort of a fake burglary, the woman who was in on it, she was like, "Did you have to break the window?"
Can't have 3 keys in a row.
That's what the producer said. That was the biggest expense on the budget, I guarantee it. Broken window. So, any other thoughts on following? I don't want to spend. We've got 4 films to get through, so let's not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to move on. I think it's a really nice, brisk little mystery thriller. And, I think there would be a very strong argument to give this anything up to a 10 out of 10, honestly, in terms of what it achieves with what it's, clearly been given to work from. judging it by the by the standards of every other film in the world, I'm going to give it a very solid 7 out of 10.
Yeah, I basically concur with that. I gave it a 7 out of 10, and yeah, I think you could easily judge it better just by virtue of they made a lot with a little. But yeah, it's a sturdy 7.
Yeah, well, for me, similar. It sort of feels like I'm judging it a little bit on the fact that it's how well they've done with what they had. For me, it's an 8. Maybe I'm taking that into account a little bit. It's I enjoyed it throughout. It's the first time I've ever seen it. I watched it for this podcast, and I enjoyed the concept of it. I liked it. I thought it was well done, and I think it's a solid film.
It is, and it's exactly the sort of film that you want to take to some producers or something. And go, look what I made with absolutely no money. Do you want to give me some money to make a film? Yeah. And like as a producer, if you're making low budget films, that's the sort of thing you go, actually, this is very competent. Like this is a team I want to invest in.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what it did. I don't know exactly what the circumstances were, where they took it, if they did a festival tour or whatever, but somewhere along the line, they got the money to make Memento, which in itself is a very low budget indie film that became. I was
going to say it's it's not a huge amount of budget, but again, it's a film that does a hell of a lot more with the money.
Yeah,
they do a very good job of making more out of the ingredients than they have. Yeah, turning water into wine essentially. That's
How big a deal is it that like it's a short story by his brother? Has his brother done much that had made any money or written anything big?
No, I mean this short story was not
published after the film.
It was not published, yeah. So it was just like, oh, my brother wrote something. Oh, that's a nice idea. I'll turn that into a script. That's about it, really.
Because to get like a film, it is low budget still, but obviously much bigger than he was working with and following. And to get someone to back him on a short story that his brother's written that hasn't been published, it seems like quite a big deal. It's quite a big jump up from what he'd made.
Yeah, and not to mention, Christopher Nolan is British and at some point ended up in America. Not sure exactly how it happened. But I did read some, again, sort of vague thing. I read that his brother was at university in America. So I don't know if that was just the reason or if they've got connections, their family or something. I don't know.
His Wikipedia page says he's British-American, but I never looked into where the American side comes from because he was born in London, as far as I know, and raised in London. So
yeah.
Whether he's got an American parent, I don't know.
But yeah, at some point he obviously teamed up with some producers and they gave him money to make Memento. And it's the sort of thing that I can see, selling on the script. That's the sort of script that someone will go, oh, hello, let's have a look at this. Yeah. As that it's a script that gets attention.
And it's a script that, gets people to actually read it because the premise is so kind of, I wonder how they're going to pull this off. If your little logline on the script when you're passing it around says, this film is told in reverse order, people are more likely to go, okay, wonder how they're going to pull that off. Or I bet they won't pull it off, and then they'll read until they see evidence that they don't, and they'll go, oh.
It's something that could easily be done very badly.
Yeah, so carrying on what I said before, I couldn't be asked rewatching these films, so I found loads of like weird wanky ways around doing it properly. I watched Memento re-edited into chronological order.
That's on the DVD, isn't it?
As preparation for this podcast, yeah.
I also did that, actually, yeah.
Really?
Such geeks. God.
And I have to say, going back to what I said before about telling stories out of chronological order, for anyone who doesn't know, Memento, Christopher Nolan's first big proper film, his second film as writer-director, is told in, they say in reverse chronological order. That's not entirely true because they'd all be, it doesn't just play in rewind. It kind of, you'll get 5 minutes in chronological order and then it'll cut to the previous 5 minutes, and then that it's done that way.
Yeah. Plus, it's broken up with chapter breaks of a kind of flashback video.
Yeah, all the black and white stuff's in full chronological, isn't it?
Yeah. But going back to what I was saying before, it is remarkable how well this film works without that gimmick.
Really?
I thought it was going to break the film. I thought it was going to ruin it, but it was still a completely compelling narrative. Very easy to follow. It worked nearly as well, I would say.
And I would say that it recontextualizes things, and the other character, in fact, all the characters, the main sort of three characters, you start to see them in a very different light, and you see, you get a much greater sense of their character. Not growth is not quite the right word, but sort of scene to scene, like where you can go, oh, they're definitely taking advantage of him there, or I'm not sure, is this guy trying to help him or not? And because you kind of know what's happening a bit more, you really get a much better sense of character. I think it's definitely, if you like Memento, it's definitely worth watching it the other way around,
absolutely.
Because it really does give you a greater depth of it, and that's the beauty of it. If you can take away that gimmick and still work, that's great stuff. That's good writing.
Exactly. And so for anyone who doesn't know, Memento, it's about a man who has a medical condition. It's a real condition where you can't lay down new long-term memories. But yeah, there's a point where he had an accident and he remembers everything in his life up until that point. But it seems that someone, John G., raped and murdered his wife, so he's on a revenge mission. It's very much a technical exercise, which I think is part of what really does it for me. I love problem solving in films, of how he is able to function on a mission to seek and get revenge on this man. And obviously, as the film plays out, you begin to learn that it's not quite as straightforward as it seems, and there's a lot of twists and turns. And I think what the gimmick here does, it really throws you into the same position as him, in that you don't know what is going on.
Exactly, yeah. It puts you in his mindset instantly.
You don't remember what's just happened. It's like you're figuring things out with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why it's a real stroke of genius here. And like we say, when you watch the film chronologically, it doesn't play that way, and you're not kind of watching it from his point of view anymore. You're kind of watching it in a
something that Al said about it building character, which is something that he obviously can't do. It's not something he's capable of doing because he can't remember what they did to him an hour ago. So it is really good that it sort of takes you out of that. You're not able to see whether these people are taking advantage or otherwise, and you're just like him, I suppose.
And I suppose that's it. By doing it in this non-linear fashion, they're able to kind of create the illusion of a character arc where there arguably isn't one.
Well, that's the beauty of it. He has this character arc at the beginning, but then he forgets it. That's the beauty of it. So when you go backwards, and I mean at the beginning in terms of chronologically. So when you go backwards, that happens at the end. I like, not to go too gushy over this. This might be one of the best scripts ever written, like this, because it works so well. It works as a story, and then when you reverse it, it still works. It feels like something that has been written and then reversed, rather than written as a thing, because it doesn't feel gimmicky.
And I expect that's the case. I imagine they knew what they were going to do with it, but I imagine they wrote it out and planned it all out chronologically, and then figured out how best to chop it up, and then refined it around those breaks.
But it's definitely something where you like I said, I watched it the right way around, the chronological way as well, and I was expecting it's just like one scene someone does something, and the next thing like, you see, they wouldn't do that actually, would they? Because if you watch, it only works backwards. There's none of that. It all works.
I'll tell you what there is a lot of Guy Pearce repeating the same line he just said. like an ad break on a sitcom where they kind of just say the same line again to remind you what was happening.
But that's also because, and another trick they use really well is that they're not just showing this like 10 minutes and then another, then jump back 10 minutes. Each chapter is broken up with this black and white segment, so you know it's kind of different immediately, of him essentially just telling the story. It's an exposition dump, but it's broken up into about 10 chapters throughout the film, so it's slowly dripping in information, which works really nicely. It also breaks up the chapters of the narrative you're following so that it doesn't feel, and now we jump back, and now we jump back. It feels like you're just pushing in and out. it's very well done.
It's a nice break as well from the reverse narrative. It's like just that second of, okay, I'm learning about this guy again.
If I can push back against us kind of being a bit gushy here, with a bit of a negative, I did feel that the film kind of said everything that needed to be said and was kind of done when I watched it in chronological order after the first half hour, because the first half hour is all of that stuff in the hotel room, all of those little exposition dump moments, and it kind of contains the whole story within it. And I felt once we moved beyond that point, I didn't need anything else. All it gave us was his relationship with Natalie, and that wasn't something I needed in the film. I was perfectly content just getting the story about Sammy Jankis, is it? Stephen Tobolowsky's character in flashback, which was great. Getting the setup and payoff of Guy Pearce as Leonard and what led to him, learning a bit about what he's doing, and you get the twist with what's actually going on with Teddy.
Yeah, I guess when we're saying you watch it in chronological order and it works, it does work, but it does feel like two stories. So the one where he goes up to where he's explaining his condition, and then, we see him killing the drug dealer, and then the kind of twist where he decides that, do you know what? I'm going to do this again, sort of thing.
That's such a significant point.
Yeah, but then there's the second story, which is, the whole thing with Natalie and Teddy. But that in itself is an engaging narrative, even if kind of what's coming at the end.
I just think it's far less compelling. I don't really care about the Natalie stuff. It always feels like the baggy, weakest part of the film to me. And Teddy, I love and enjoy, but I get enough of him in that first half hour that, you could have given this to me as a 35-minute, I think it is, film, and I'd think, wow, hats off, brilliant.
Plus, most of that story that you're talking about is, him sat in a hotel room talking on the phone to someone we don't hear. So it is just him telling a story. It's a total exposition monologue. So that just on its own perhaps wouldn't be as engaging. The fact that they've broken it up.
Well, it's that and the ending of the film, basically, that I'm talking about. You get that, you get the bit with the drug dealer, you get the bit where the twist's revealed. That's all I needed. There is something to be said that it's a lot stronger when you watch it as intended, edited the way that it's meant to be.
That's
but it's remarkable that it works as well as it does, told chronologically.
Shall we talk about the characters? And the actors. So we got the central character, Leonard, played by Guy Pearce. And this was Guy Pearce, obviously he was a known entity at this point, but this was the film that kind of really made him like, oh, this guy could be a bankable star, which hasn't quite paid off, but,
It's by far and away the best bit of Guy Pearce I think I've seen off the top of my head, certainly.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that much of a Guy Pearce fan, to be honest, generally. I think he's fine.
Yeah, but I think he's often a bit bland, uninteresting. I don't have a problem with him, but here he's a really charismatic, charming lead man. I've got to give it to him. He's great.
But there is a certain sort of vacantness to the character because
it's not a hugely trying role from an acting point of view, but I think he does a lot to make it as compelling to watch such an empty kind of character.
Yeah.
I do love his just general acceptance. Well, the character certainly is. He seems to pull off that acceptance of his condition really well. Like he's not angry about it. He's got revenge. He's angry about other things, but his condition doesn't seem to be one of them. It's just for most of the film, is like, yes, this is the condition I'm dealing with. The moment where they're in the chase scene and it starts with just what am I doing while he's running?
Oh god!
And that delivery and that deadpan moment where he decides he's chasing the guy.
Okay, so what am I doing? Oh, I'm chasing this guy. No, he's chasing me.
When you watch that in chronological order, it becomes really funny. More than it is normally, because you are just watching him being chased by a guy, and then going, "What am I doing? Oh, I'm chasing someone."
And so Guy Pearce, who off the back of this, I was looking at his thing. He did the Time Machine and Count of Monte Cristo. So he had these two leads in period, both in period films for whatever reason. Like that seemed to be like this made him a lead man. And then since then, not so much. But like obviously, he turns up in a lot of stuff. He's a regular.
He works on a lot of TV, doesn't he? And like quite a big TV. It's not like he's slumming it. I imagine he's still doing.
He's never struggled for work, but he never quite crossed over into that kind of like the new Brad Pitt kind of category of just a bankable star. It never quite paid off. But yeah, in the supporting cast, the other main person in it, I think, is Joe Pantoliano as Teddy. Now, I mean, everyone's a fan of Joe Pantoliano, obviously.
Yeah, this was one issue I had with the film, is that I know he's got it written on his photograph saying don't trust his lies or whatever, but he's just so likable that I just I'd want to like him and I'd want to trust him.
I think there's a real sinister edge to him in this film. Like, superficially, he's so lovely and likable, but I think you do not trust him. You do feel like maybe there's something else going on here. And then the fact that they're ultimately...
fairness, but...
Yeah, and there isn't really that much... he's largely on...
I mean, he's still using him to kill drug dealers.
But
he's
he's not like... I think it would be fair to say he is Leonard's friend.
Yeah, closer than anyone else, certainly.
Yeah, and he's, largely quite nice to him for the most part. I think it adds this air of tragedy, and when you watch it chronologically, it's all the sadder because you know exactly what's going on with him, and it is just very like, oh, Teddy.
That's again what comes along in the chronological telling is how much that comes across as in the ambiguity of him. Yeah, he doesn't seem like he's not the bad guy, but he'll definitely use Leonard for his own purposes. Yeah, but he feels like he wants to do right by Leonard as well.
Yeah, it's usually just a little like jokey attempt to steal his car. This isn't your car; it's my car.
Yeah.
And I'm still not sure, having watched it again and then watched it backwards, so to speak. I'm still not sure if he was actually a cop or not. He definitely had a cop badge. And I think he was because he had access to stuff.
Yeah, I think he was.
But there was a brief moment where I was watching and I was thinking, is Teddy imaginary? Is he just in Leonard's head?
Yeah.
But actually, we only see him interact with anyone once, and that's the tattoo artist, where she sort of tells him to get out of the room. But I think that's the only time we actually see him directly talking to anyone else. Because I was like trying to figure out if that was going to come into play, or was like, is that a deliberately ambiguous thing that they put in to kind of maybe just one of many elements in this film that sows confusion because Leonard is confused.
Yeah.
But I don't think it plays off. But I think the fact that there's such a small cast in this may just be a budgetary thing. But there are very few people in it, really, very few characters.
Yeah.
Because, we've got Guy Pearce and Joe Pantoliano. Then the sort of the third main character is Carrie-Anne Moss playing Natalie.
Both these two just off The Matrix as well, isn't it? This is just after The Matrix came out. Yeah.
I did read something that Carrie-Anne Moss recommended Joe Pantoliano to the filmmakers, and they got him in for whatever. So she's the sort of third character, I suppose, and this is one where when you watch it chronologically, you realise just how little she actually is in it. Because when you're seeing her backwards, it's kind of like you see them together and you go, oh, there's definitely some backstory here. There's definitely something going on here. And then it kind of like, oh, hang on, they've only just met. But you really don't get much of a handle on what she's doing, like how much she's really playing with him. Because, again, you do get the sense that she cares about this guy. She doesn't really know him, but like she sees what he's going through and she's like feels bad for him and she empathizes with him. But then she does use him in a very overt way. She manipulates him in quite a cold and calculating way, which makes her come across as a real kind of nasty piece of work.
Yeah,
I think it's fair to say she's the villain of the film.
Well, yeah, like in her mind as well. This guy's turned up in her boyfriend's car and wearing her boyfriend's clothes.
Must, at the very least, suspect that he's killed her boyfriend because she didn't actually know for a fact he's dead.
Yeah.
But obviously something's happened. And, the fact that she's going out with a drug dealer does imply that she's not perhaps the most moral character anyway. But you do still get that ambiguity or the greyness, I guess, of that she obviously does care about him. She sees what this guy is dealing with and she empathizes. And even when she uses him, she then helps him. She does help him out by finding this license plate that he wants.
Yeah. But she also goes out of her way to not just use him, but to really mess with him.
Well, no, she's doing that for a reason, though. She's trying to get this guy off her tail. And she's
I sort of read it in a different way, and I know that it works both ways for her. She sort of saw it as, well, if he gets rid of Dodd, brilliant, that saves me any shit. But also, if he gets killed by Dodd, brilliant, he's the guy who's fucked up my boyfriend. I want rid of both of them, either of them, whatever. So it's sort of like a win-win for her. I don't see her as really empathising with him at all, if I'm honest.
There is a scene where she out and out mocks him, mocks the fact that his wife was raped and murdered, calls him a retard, among other things, due to, having a problem in his head. Says some really horrible things, and then sort of laughs at him because he won't remember it.
Yeah, but how much of that is, just she's being a nasty piece of work? But she's trying to get him to hit her. That's the whole point. Yeah.
Chronologically, is the last scene with her when she hands over the envelope.
Yeah.
Because, I can't really remember what she was like in that. She certainly starts out being quite against him, like she doesn't like him. But she does seem to mellow, if I remember that scene rightly. By the end of it, she does seem quite nice to him. So maybe she does empathise.
There is, and there's a scene where she's sort of basically looking at all the tattoos on his chest, and she sort of, basically, she gets the story behind this. And there's definitely empathy there. And like I say, I think when you watch this chronologically, you really do get these very grey characters of, they do bad things, but they're not necessarily evil. Perhaps they are. You don't really know their motivations. And I think it would be difficult to I think you would need to cement that down a bit more if you were going to tell this chronologically, or you would feel like you needed to. But because it's backwards, the ambiguity really helps it, because obviously the more vague you are, the less you're giving away in this backwards narrative in terms of, you can set up a character that seems nice, but then the next scene they seem like a villain, and you go, okay, what's going on? I think that's just all part of the writing, but it creates these ambiguous characters, which by their very nature is more realistic. That's why I really like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I know we've already done Guy Pearce's character, and what are your feelings on Leonard and his sort of morality? There's the whole... he's out to kill someone, which puts question marks over him to start with, but you can maybe understand why. But then obviously at the end of the actual film, but in the beginning of it chronologically, where he consciously says, right, I'm going to fool myself into thinking this guy who's just fucked with me, and I'm going to kill him. That's a conscious decision. That is I am going to murder this person, even though he then forgets that he made the decision.
He's a nasty piece of work, and I think that's the twist, really. But, you see that in his life before the accident. He was, professionally made loads and loads of money by figuring out ways to screw people out of medical insurance, essentially. It's
being that numb person for business, though, and going, yeah, all right, I'll just murder him.
Yeah.
It's
and that's it. You understand why he's doing it, It's like he's just looking out for his own well-being, but it's it's an incredibly selfish thing to just kill someone, an innocent, essentially innocent man, for your own psychological well-being.
I think it's really good character writing, because that comes from someone who doesn't have to live with consequences.
Yeah,
it's certainly emotionally speaking, he doesn't feel any guilt for that. How often in the moment you go, God, I could kill that guy, and then so you put something into action, and 10 minutes later you've forgotten why, but it's like, well, this note says I have to kill him, so and it's the same. Like, you see him hit this woman in the face, because she's no threat to him. She's just sort of saying nasty things to him, and he's like, oh, I'm going to punch you in the face. Yeah. Like, he could just walk away. She has no hold on him whatsoever. So, perhaps not the best guy in the world, but you do feel for him. There's so many times where you just feel like, well, that must be terrible.
But I think that's part of the twist, is that, the guy we were rooting for is actually arguably the villain of the piece. But
oh yeah, definitely, yeah. Because that's in the way the film is told. that comes right at the end, where you kind of find out, oh wow, he knew what he was doing and he did it anyway.
Anyway, Memento, really, triumphant look at me world film from a filmmaker being given the money to make a statement. Phenomenal achievement from a kind of technical point of view. Really, really well made, well acted. Difficult to fault, so I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
See, I had slightly different effect when I watched it chronologically. It really cemented for me just how well written it was and how well crafted the performances were to make it work in the context.
Oh, same here. Yeah. I think I'm probably just coming up to a 9 rather than down.
Well, I think I went up to a 10. I gave it 10 out of 10.
Wow,
a rare occurrence.
You've both sort of gone above and beyond myself. I really enjoyed it. This is on the second time I've watched it. I did enjoy it the second time as well, but weirdly it didn't hold me like I felt that it should. I found myself uninterested at times, and whether that's just because I'd seen it before and knew what was coming, which is, I know people criticise that about this film a lot of time, which I think is unfair, but it did sort of lower me to it. I was probably at an 8 to 9 before, whereas I've ended up on a 7. Maybe you just lose something the more you watch it, because for me anyway, as a casual film watcher, I don't know, it lacked that impact the second time and probably brought it down for me.
Okay, so we move on. Obviously, Memento was a massive hit, especially relative to its kind of budget and expectations. It was a bit of a sleeper hit, and that got Christopher Nolan's foot in the door of proper big studios.
This is the film I always forget that's in his filmography. I try and remember his films off the top of my head.
This is the least Chris Nolan film Chris Nolan's ever made, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, well, we talk about Insomnia now, 2002 film, and it definitely feels the least Christopher Nolan film in terms of script. Yes, but it has got his kind of flourishes to it in terms of the way it's shot, and
it's a weird one because it's very, very close to the original film that it's a remake of. I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, Insomnia is a remake of is it Norwegian?
Yeah, I think so.
Norwegian film from 1997. It's your typical kind of American English language remake of a film that's been proven successful internationally. I don't know, it's an odd one. He kind of does find a way to arguably make it his own, but he doesn't go very far off book.
You two have both seen the original. What are there any main differences, or is it?
I'm annoyed with myself really because I watched Insomnia, Christopher Nolan's film, probably over 10 years ago now, and I couldn't be asked rewatching it for this. I just rewatched the original Norwegian film. Having watched that, I kind of did want to then watch Chris Nolan's version again, but I didn't have time before this recording to fit it in, unfortunately.
Well, I did watch, but I watched Insomnia as well, probably 10 years ago, whenever, and I watched it again. Watched the Norwegian version pretty much straight after, like within half an hour, probably. So I can give you quite a direct comparison, and it is interesting. The things, like, just to be clear, Christopher Nolan did not write the script for the remake. It's written by someone called Hilary Seitz. However, I do understand that he had significant input. That's telling, I think, because there are some kind of Nolan-esque features here. The main difference I would think of is they've tightened up and focus some of the motivations more, which I think is a benefit. In the Norwegian film, it's kind of like, well, why are you doing that? I don't know. What's the point of that? It feels a bit more vague. It makes sense, but with this, it's like Al Pacino. Basically, in Insomnia, Al Pacino's character kills his partner accidentally, but he does have motivation to kill this guy. So he starts, even in his own head, he's not sure if he's done it or not. And we as an audience never really know. Did he do it on purpose? Was there some subconscious element that he knew what was happening? And it plays into the fact that he's not sleeping, and so he's just confused in general. In the Norwegian version, you don't have that. It was an accident, and then he's just trying to cover it up. So it's more about guilt of hiding from that, rather than personal kind of emotional guilt.
I would suggest watching the original Insomnia and comparing it to Chris Nolan's film for anyone who does make a real point of criticising Christopher Nolan's ability to handle character in his films, because I think this shows that he's actually far more capable of it than his critics often give him credit for. And it's perhaps that he's just less interested in that side of what he's doing in his films. But the fact that the characters are so much stronger in his version of the film suggests a very clear understanding of what films need in them to
I would also
work.
argue that in the Norwegian version, the insomnia element, where the guy is just sort of slowly not sleeping and slowly losing his mind, doesn't play very much, does it?
Yeah, I completely agree. There's, just to pick a scene that, because I very much had the effect of being reminded of each scene in the remake as I was watching the original film. Like, oh yeah, this is the scene where this happens. There's a scene where he is staying at this hotel. He asks the receptionist for some material to black out the windows because, for anyone who hasn't seen either film, they're both set in parts of the world that have continuous daylight for 6-month stretches,
but not blackout blinds, apparently.
Yeah.
Which is why would you not have blackout blinds?
Yeah, so, especially in a hotel.
Yeah.
It's not like it's for people who live there and are used to it. In the original film, Stellan Skarsgård is the main guy who asks for these blackout blinds and puts them up, and it's very much just a kind of like, oh yeah, I guess he's not sleeping that well. Whereas, in the remake, from what I remember, it's far more of a, I'm getting driven to madness and I'm making it very clear, I'm going to do this to try and be able to sleep, and it's clearly upsetting me. And it's just...
Yeah, you're certainly reminded that he's not sleeping quite regularly, even if it's just Robin Williams' character saying, oh, it's been 4 days since you've slept. There's always a constant reminder that he's not sleeping and getting gradually further down the rabbit hole.
Plus, you also, just in terms of performance, Al Pacino's performance, he just looks tired and like he's just out of his head all the time. It works really nicely, actually, and obviously you're telling it visually as well. The way that Nolan shoots it is, things are confusing, a lot of flashing lights, quick cuts, a lot of that going on. That's where your direction comes in. That's what that is. The editor.
Stellan Skarsgård's a great actor, but it's not a role that really works as a big showcase for him, this film.
Yeah, it's a very cold performance, actually.
Whereas
the character's very stoic and just doesn't give much away. That's the idea.
Whereas, for whatever reason, Al Pacino, fantastic performance. Like, one of the better performances from him in his latter years, I'd say. And, add into the mix Robin Williams again. Great performance from a great actor. I think there's, something to be said that the acting in the remake is also a cut above what you get in the original film. You've also got Hilary Swank in there as well.
Hey, I was going to set a timer for how long it would take for someone to say Hilary Swank. I completely forgot.
The original as well, there's kind of a significant difference to the ending, which in some ways I prefer the original. So what happens with the Al Pacino?
It's not as big.
In the Al Pacino version, it's a much more dramatic kind of closing.
Well, but before we explain the ending, I suppose, just for anyone who's listening who hasn't watched it. So it's this cop who's brought out to this part of the world to investigate murder. Yeah. Where are they set?
It's in Alaska.
Alaska in the remake, right?
So this young girl young woman, she's 17, has been killed, and because it's quite an unusual, not a crime of passion. It's obviously someone's murdered her and then cleaned her up and stuff. They kind of get the big cops in from LA, but then there's also this other thing going on that they've been sent up there because the internal affairs are sniffing around, and they're like, let's get these guys out of the state on something. Let's get them out of the picture for a while. So there's this motivation like behind them. There's a little bit of backstory. And yeah, and then it's essentially just quite, and this is the real weakness to the script. It's a very by the numbers kind of cop, has to get into the mind of the killer and chase them kind of thing.
Yeah, not hated. That first half hour is...
Yeah, it's just you've seen it all before. Yeah. That's the problem. Yeah, it's not done badly. It's just like I've seen.
Yeah, this whole little big cop I can spot things. I'm a super cop thing. Just really grates me. Really struggled to get through that first half.
And it's not done with enough character and interesting new things to sell it. Like Al Pacino, he's a great actor, but I've seen Heat. I've seen him do this before, and it just doesn't have enough
wide-eyed new detective that's all loves him.
Yeah.
So then, in the course of investigating this, he accidentally kills someone and he's trying to hide it. But the real murderer has seen that, and so they kind of blackmail each other. But it's kind of a little cat and mouse affair going on, and then how does that turn out? And the main guy very much struggling with his conscience because he's a good cop ultimately, but is he? Where does that line fall? It's an interesting character thing, and I think it's just a bit too by the numbers to really grab your attention.
Yeah.
But in the end, basically what happens is the Al Pacino character gets killed catches the bad guy, but gets shot himself, and the wide-eyed young cop who looks up to him, she realizes he's done something wrong, but she's going to hide it, and he says, like, no, you've got to be true, be a good cop, and all that sort of thing. It's kind of he ultimately...
That's when the sort of character comes in, isn't it? It's that, all the bad things he did for a good reason, but then it sets him off down this path of doing bad things, and
Yeah, and it's quite a nice thing, especially for a policeman character. There must be so many times where you have to do something like outside of the rules to make sure something happens, or you see criminals getting away with things and all that. I think that's a nice idea to play with. In the Norwegian film, the Stellan Skarsgård character, basically at the end, he just walks away. He's fine. But you really get this sense of that he has to live with some guilt. And he lives with this knowledge that he's done bad things. But you also get much bigger sense throughout the film that he's quite a shitty person. Like the really obvious thing is at one point
he shoots a dog.
Yeah, Al Pacino needs to,
and he's already dead.
Well, that's it. When Al Pacino shoots the dog to get the bullet, the dog is dead. Stellan Skarsgård shoots a perfectly healthy dog.
Really?
He goes into an alley and he goes into an alley with a bit of meat and goes like, "Here, boy."
Oh no!
The dog comes over and then.
Yeah, that takes away that sort of that ambiguity of a character, doesn't it? When
that's the little differences they make to make this character much more sympathetic, but that means you get this kind of moral ending, and it works. It's fine, but I would have liked all that, but then him perhaps surviving at the end and having to live with guilt, and that would have been nice, I think.
I think the original film, to me, I know this is a whole subgenre, Scandinavian crime dramas, and I'm not hugely well versed in it, but the original Insomnia feels very much to me just generic, cut from that cloth. It's a Scandinavian crime procedural, movie. And it's fine. It's very bleak and grey and drab. They are, these are things that kind of go hand in hand with Christopher Nolan. In what we know, Wally Pfister's cinematography tends to be very bleak and grey. So it speaks volumes, I think, just how much better Christopher Nolan's remake is. Like, you kind of see the subtlety about what he does, because superficially it's kind of already there in the original film, but on a deeper level, the cinematography is so much nicer and there's more artistry about it in the remake, and it conveys more of a sense of this impending dreary light that's driving this guy to feel a bit crazy. And like we said, there's more character, and just as simple as they inject a bit of action into the film, but it doesn't feel contrived. You know, that there's this whole set piece with a load of logs floating out on the water at the end.
Yeah, I really like that, actually.
Which is really great, you know, really well done. There's a real sense of stakes and like, oh god, this very seemingly mundane thing is actually really dangerous and these guys could die, where they're, you know, fucking about on logs floating in the water, but then obviously if they go under the logs, they're going to have a much harder time breathing coming up to the surface. And that's not in the original film at all, for example.
Nothing like that.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is it's the incredibly rare example of an English language remake of a foreign film that builds on and improves upon the original, and I would say is significantly better. I think the only time we've ever discussed such a thing on this show before was when we spoke about Ringu and The Ring, and even then, I think I still preferred the original, but you and Calvin were on the side of the remake. But yeah, here I think the remake is a better film, so I give the original Insomnia a 7 out of 10, but the remake I would give an 8.
That's interesting. My main problem with Nolan's Insomnia was just like, yeah, I've seen it all before. I was not engaged really at all. And I think when I watched the Norwegian version, I was perhaps a bit more sympathetic to that. And it felt, because perhaps there isn't as much going on, it felt a bit more character driven, like this sort of central character. That was a bit more interesting. It felt like watching a TV thing. I guess that's just a budgetary thing as well as anything else. But like, it felt like watching an episode of Cracker or something. That's not a bad thing. But I think I slightly view it on a different level. I watch Nolan's Insomnia and I think this is a Hollywood production. I'm watching a film here, and I kind of expect something more, I think. And I get more. But I think, you know, my scale is slightly different. Anyway, the point is I gave them both 6. I did find it fairly disappointing, I think.
I think it's a masterfully directed film.
Oh, I think there's definitely stuff where you go, oh, I'm interested in the director here. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the original, so there's no comparison as far as I'm concerned, but I gave this a 6 as well, which feels a bit harsh because I did find it actually really watchable. I didn't feel distracted. I was, you know, engaged in it. But it did remind me, like Al said, of sort of this run-of-the-mill detective doing their detective-y shit, and I've seen it all before. It's done better than most of the ones that I've seen that are similar. So yeah, I gave it a 6 as well, whereas other stuff like this I would probably be unwatchable to me, whereas this was, which pulls it up to a watchable 6.
Right.
And I mean, I think that's it for Christopher Nolan's shaky beginnings. I mean, not shaky, but, you know, is transitional early days into
and
superstar.
It is really the classic
director.
The classic template. You know, you got total, like, no budget, just calling card film, indie hit that gets you noticed by the studios, solid studio film just to prove that you can work in the system and you kind of do what you told me you need to. Right, here's a franchise. And it is, but obviously throughout that period proving himself again and again and showing that he has quite a distinct visual style, not necessarily an auteur way, but like he'll make something work for what he wants to do with it. And I think more that kind of, there is a kind of darkness, a grittiness to what he's done.
I would say he's very much an auteur. Yeah, I mean, he's known for gritty, you know, he's the guy who put the post 9/11 spin on superhero movies, isn't he? He's the guy who added that, what people kind of roll their eyes about now, the idea of a dark, gritty superhero movie. I mean, that was his invention. But before we get into that, I mean, you know I keep lots of stupid lists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of my stupidest film lists that I keep is a list of all the directors. It's like my top 100 directors, where I rate all of the films that I've seen out of 10 and then give them like an average score based on how much I love their work.
Oh, nice.
Overall.
How many films by a director do you have to see to gain entry onto this list? Because you obviously can't just have, I've seen one film by them and it was great.
I think I work with a minimum of 3, which I think gives a solid entry point.
Okay.
But in the case of Christopher Nolan, I've seen his entire filmography once over at least, and we're in the process now of rewatching it all for this.
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan is currently at number 10, which is pretty impressive, I think.
That's pretty good.
But
it's not that high.
for context's sake, number 9 is Trey Parker, the man behind South Park. So.
So what have you got? Who else is up there? Robert Zemeckis?
Oh no, I don't. Robert Zemeckis is number 38.
Oh,
Do you want the top 10?
Up and down, I guess.
I'm going to say they've got to be consistently really good, surely.
Yeah, I mean, bear in mind, the problem with this way of doing things is some of these directors...
You've only seen their best films.
Yeah, I've only seen 3 of their films, and,
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you right now, Shane Meadows is number 8, and that's one of those where it's like, I've seen 3 of his films, I really like 2 of them. I'm fairly confident if I went and watched all of them, he'd drop right down.
Yeah.
Who else? Spielberg. Spielberg's got to be up there, right?
I was going to say, Spielberg's made so many films that surely something's going to bring him down.
They're all quality.
Spielberg is number 64 on my list.
Wow.
Whoa.
Craziness. Absolute craziness.
Why is that craziness? Do bear in mind, he's made Warhorse, he's made the BFG.
This is the flaw in this system, though.
He's made Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. This is an
fair
average,
enough.
it's not a
Yeah, you have
selected highlights.
one hit, one failure, and it drags you down.
Yeah.
That's the joy of it. Edgar Wright. I think Edgar Wright was number 1, and then he's been bringing that average down ever since he.
Sam Raimi.
Ever since Hot Fuzz, I think the average has been coming down. Sam Raimi is number 19.
Ooh,
and
that's
he
a
is
shocker.
someone I would say is my favourite working director. So it's obviously not a perfect system, but I've seen all but one of his films, Sam Raimi. So that's quite inaccurate.
All the crap as well.
I'm trying to think of someone who would have only done you'd have only seen 3 films of that are all really good that would put anyone in the top 10.
Shall I keep... Right, well, I've given you number 9, Trey Parker, number 8, Shane Meadows. Number 7 is someone you're not going to get because they've only made 3 films, directed 3 films. Martin McDonagh, the guy who did In Bruges, 7 Psychopaths, 3 Billboards.
Yeah.
So, Number 6, Alfred Hitchcock.
Oh, really?
How many... Hitchcock's done some real shit, so how
Yeah,
many
well, this is
films
it.
of
I've
his have
only
you
seen the good stuff that, I've not properly dug into it. I've seen 12 of Hitchcock's films.
He's done pretty well.
That's not bad, though. That's not bad.
Yeah.
But those are like the 12 classics, I haven't seen Topaz or Family.
Aren't you
Plot.
are you a big Tarantino fan? Is he in there?
I mean, he is.
Right,
So
okay.
I guess I am a big Tarantino fan. Yeah, he's number 4.
Right, okay.
Ooh.
I give his films an average rating of 8 out of 10, if you're
Blimey.
interested in it.
What about Tim Burton? He must have dragged that down recently.
He has completely tanked his place on this list. Yeah, Tim Burton is 63.
Ooh.
Just next to Spielberg, was that?
Yeah, it is just next to Spielberg.
Go on, who else then?
Number 5. This is one that you perhaps should have guessed because he hasn't made many films and they are to a pretty high standard. James Cameron.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Number 3 is Edgar Wright. Again, not many films there. I have a feeling that score's gonna come down with time. Number 2, Charlie Chaplin.
Okay.
Right, okay.
I've seen just, I'd say, about half of his directorial efforts, and they're all to a very good standard. Number 1, and I think this is a very respectable answer here, so I feel like Alan's going to laugh no matter what I say, but
Go.
this is a really solid choice, actually. I mean, it's not it's a choice. Sidney Lumet, or Lumet. Is it Lumet?
Yeah, I can't argue with that, actually, yeah. Especially if you've seen the ones he's renowned for, yeah, the ones.
Well, this is it. I've only seen, the classics, and they're pretty good.
Yeah, I can't argue with that, actually.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a tangent.
It was.
So, let's jump in to Batman Begins. They obviously entrusted Christopher Nolan with essentially a reboot of this franchise, which is hard to put into context of 2005 now. It's a different time, isn't it? Superheroes world.
Yeah, there was only really Spider-Man that was doing anything at the time, wasn't there? That was out.
X-Men as well, yeah.
X-Men, yeah, sorry.
Batman was a pre-established huge franchise, but kind of from the 80s and the 90s. He's not really... Basically, in 2005 or 2003 or 4, whenever this went into production, giving this guy Batman wasn't quite the huge entrustment that, I think it would be now. They were obviously a lot more willing to give it to an auteur and let them put their stamp on it. And to be fair, that's kind of what they did with Tim Burton. They really let Burton do his own thing with Batman as well, and it worked for them. It's easy now to think, Chris Nolan, they gave him this huge IP and it was this big deal. But I think it was, relatively speaking, still quite a small project. But, to give Christopher Nolan credit, he took this thing and it's a very confident bit of world building. It's it almost plays like the Elseworlds comic books you get, which are these kind of non-canon... Imagine if Batman was a ninja kind of storylines. And it almost played like, imagine if Batman, but real, in the real world. And it's kind of weird that it's almost become the definitive version of Batman now and what we think of when we think of Batman. But yeah, I have to say, I think it's difficult to overstate what a revolution this film was. And how much Christopher Nolan kind of did to shape where we're currently at in Hollywood as well, for better or for worse. The scene, this film ends with a sequence setting up the Joker.
The little card, yeah.
Yeah, and the only difference between that and what we get in films to this day is that it takes place just before the credits start instead of 30 seconds into the credits.
Yeah.
We've spoken about Batman Begins on this podcast before. Yeah. It's probably worth mentioning.
We did a whole Batman, the world of Batman, yeah.
Yeah, back in 2016, I think that will have been.
Yeah, and that'll be the last time I watch this film.
Same here.
Long enough ago that I wanted to watch it again and get a fresh perspective on it.
Well, I didn't want to watch it again, so instead I watched Adam West's Batman the movie. That's not true. That's a joke. I did rewatch Batman Begins, but I didn't really want to, and I've got to give it credit. It really did win me over. It was like, oh god, I've got to put this on again, have I? And I think when we spoke about this film last time round, I remember being a bit down on it, because my memory is I'd rewatched it for the podcast then, and it hadn't really lived up to my memory of it. And I think I bumped it down to a 7 out of 10 then. I've got our ratings here. Calvin gave it an 8 out of 10, and you gave it a 7 out of 10, Alan. But, I kind of saw what I used to see in it, rewatching it. I think it's a really quite remarkable bit of work, even if it's not necessarily playing to the kinds of things that I personally like on a subjective level.
My problems with it, I think it suffers from, sort of paradoxically, it does suffer from, first of all, it requires prior knowledge. It kind of assumes kind of what Batman is and who he is.
I don't think that's true at all.
I disagree with that as well.
Yeah, I completely disagree with that.
Well, if you let me finish my sentence, basically I was going to say...
I will do no such thing.
Paradoxically, it feels like there's a lot of giving backstory. But... I don't know, somehow, and I know, like I say, it is paradoxical. I don't know quite why it makes sense. It feels like the first half an hour is just backstory and like, we've seen it all before. But then it still feels like we're not establishing the character so much as the backstory. And so it feels like, that's what I think I mean when I say it feels like there's assumed knowledge there. I'm not explaining that very well, am
I? I think that's just Christopher Nolan's way of telling a story. He's not as interested in the characters.
Yeah,
I came to this in 2005 or 6, whenever I came around to watching it, with very little knowledge of Batman, really. I don't know if I'd even seen Tim Burton's films at that point. If I had, I'd barely really paid attention to them. Batman was not a character I was particularly interested in or familiar with. And it makes perfect sense, and it set up this character, and what I know of him now, it tells that story without any real knowledge of what came before it, I think. And if you have that deeper contextual knowledge, it will perhaps enhance your viewing, but I don't think it's necessary at all.
Yeah, I thought it was quite a nice mix of sort of like two origins at once. Like, you know, the childhood story was obviously mixed in with the whole climbing the mountain and the training and all of that lot. And
yeah, we're getting back to non-linear storytelling with this one, and that is right there the justification for it. It allows you to have these two concurrent stories.
And also, you know, the child story, you could argue most people know. Weirdly, my girlfriend was in the room when I was watching the beginning of this, and she was like, oh God, do they tell the origin story every time?
Yes.
And I asked her which time she'd seen it, and it was in the Tim Burton one, which is the only Batman film she's aware of. And I was like, well, yeah, they have to do it every time because you haven't seen it previous to the Tim Burton one. So they have to put something in to give some kind of knowledge for anyone that is new.
Yeah, and to be fair, it is called Batman Begins, which does imply, right, this is the origin story movie. Yeah. Tim Burton's film, from what I remember of it, largely skims over the origin. It's more of a flashback, isn't it, that's kind of chucked in there. Whereas, yeah, I think this film at the time, from what I remember, was very much sold to audiences as they're doing a prequel, they're doing a Batman prequel, because it was kind of before people had got used to the idea of reboots. Yeah, I think it's justified in being a Batman origin story.
Yeah, in terms of being a Batman story, I like it. You see him going from this sort of angry young man to the Batman, right? And I think that works. My main problem with it in terms of the structure and stuff is like that first 20 to 30 minutes just feels like a series of montages.
That is true.
That is,
the pacing's a bit off.
I think that's what I mean when I say prior knowledge. It's like you're just thrown in with this character. You don't really establish the character, and it feels like that. This is okay. I've figured out what I was trying to say earlier. The first 25 minutes, yes, it is a story that's setting up a character, but it feels like it's setting up a character with you already knowing where we're going with it. Like, as in, you know that character that you know. Here's where he comes from. Whereas it's not. If you just watch this cold from the beginning, it's just like, who's this kid? If you've no idea what a Batman is.
Yeah, I suppose there's no real explanation of Bruce Wayne, I suppose, but at the same time, for a film like this, there is sort of an implied knowledge mostly worldwide. Yeah, because it is there. You can't ignore that people have that knowledge on the most part.
I think there is a point where it's okay to assume knowledge. You know, Batman is one of the most... It's like if you if you made a movie about Jesus Christ, you're going to assume some degree of knowledge about what Jesus Christ is. And
So you're saying Batman's like Jesus?
Well, yeah, I don't think it's particularly
he came to save us.
Absurd to compare people's knowledge of Batman with people's knowledge of Jesus in this day and age.
But also, how much of his character do you need? I know that you sort of, like, I'm not criticising your love of films where people sit down and talk for 2 hours necessarily, but you are mostly about the character in a plot, whereas, you know, Batman is essentially out for revenge, and then it leads to him wanting to save his city. You don't need to know, like, about his first girlfriend, and we do find out about his first girlfriend, unfortunately, in Batman Begins.
In the many Batman stories I've read or seen, you know, cartoons and things, like, Batman's never interesting. The only time I've ever found him compelling was Batman Beyond, when they aged him up to be about 90, and suddenly he's this grizzled, hardened, Clint Eastwood-esque guy who can't be Batman like he used to, and he's trying to train up a protege, and suddenly he's an interesting character because it's a completely different character. But, you know, other than that, he's a bland cipher, really, who exists to tell stories with the villains, and I think he's about as good a take on that character as you'll find in a film in this film.
Like I say, I actually find the character really engaging, and I liked the arc of him, because at first I was like thinking, this like all the Liam Neeson bit where he's training, and it was like sort of increasingly as it goes along, like, I think this guy's a total dickhead. Like, this is really sort of fascist mentality, macho dickheadness. But, like, obviously that's so that he can rebel against it and kind of come to a greater truth of justice rather than vengeance. And I really liked that. I like that character. I like that I didn't like him at the beginning. I thought he was a dickhead. And then it's kind of like, okay, we see where he's going. You understand why it's coming from. the whole bit with the girl who has an influence on him and all that. I thought it all worked nicely.
Ra's al Ghul's such an odd character in Batman lore in that, again, I don't think he's ever been interesting, ever. I think every time he used to turn up in Batman the Animated Series, it was like, oh, for God's sake, it's a Ra's al Ghul episode. And I don't think I've never seen him be remotely worth the time of day anywhere. So it's an odd thing that they're so committed to the character. Because I might be wrong, but I don't think he's a particularly popular character with fans either. Maybe it's just, maybe I don't like Ra's al Ghul because it's Liam Neeson, and we've documented my issues with Liam Neeson on this podcast. And I think this is the first time I can say this after having watched Schindler's List, which was kind of... I always used to give him the benefit of the doubt because I hadn't seen Schindler's List. Maybe he was good once. But I've seen Schindler's List. Great film. He gets away with it in the film. I don't think his performance is particularly noteworthy. I just think Liam Neeson's a terrible, terrible actor. And again, credit to Christopher Nolan. I think this is one of the performances where he kind of gets away with being a terrible actor. They kind of make the film around him.
But yeah, I think this film does have very little emotion in the characters.
Yes.
And that comes across with Liam Neeson, but that suits him. Cillian Murphy just plays everything quite cold.
I think he's brilliant in this. I really like him anyway, but I think he's particularly good in this.
But that's it. If you can make that work, I think, if anything, Michael Caine is the one who kind of holds the emotional focus.
He's the beating heart of this film, 100%. Yeah,
and they play up to that a bit more in the later films, don't they? But in this one, it's all quite cold and
Gary Oldman as Jim Gordon, I think, is the other bit of warmth in there, and. I was thinking about this, watching it again earlier. Phenomenal casting. Great. He's my favourite Gordon we've had, which is saying something, because J.K. Simmons, who's one of my all-time favourite actors, has played the role. But it works so well here. He's great in this film. He brings a lot to a very small role.
Speaking of a small role, this is only a couple of years after Tiptoes. So obviously it was at the peak of his career.
Yeah.
One other sort of small detail that was annoying me was just how much is can we really hammer home how much of a fucking great guy Thomas Wayne was? Every single thing he did was perfect, and by the way, he was fucking perfect, and he gave all his money to the poor people.
It's the only thing that seems to bother Bruce Wayne either, when he's slagged off about his dad, is that seems to really hurt him when people say he's not like his dad, and...
But it's just I think you just have to really over-egg it because, at the end of the day, he was a billionaire CEO of a multinational company. Obviously he wasn't a nice guy. Obviously he was a total arsehole because that's the job description.
You can become that rich.
Yeah, right. So they have to go, oh no, he's one of the nice ones. He still lived in a mansion with servants and stuff, but he was really down to earth. Well, because he goes on the public transport when he goes to opera with his 10-year-old child. He really loves opera. Shut up. That wound me up.
Who else is in this film? We've got
Katie Holmes.
Katie Holmes, who's a bit
Joffrey from's in it.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out where I recognise him from. Yeah.
Katie Holmes doesn't make it into the next one.
No, I was going to ask this actually. It's
she's replaced.
She's often slagged off in this, and she's replaced, and people say she's terrible in it, and I do agree. But I also think the character terribly written. She's just really an awful character.
Weak character. Yeah.
You could get anyone to play that part, and she would be awful, regardless.
And even getting ahead of next week here, but even in The Dark Knight, that's true. She is just a badly written, uninteresting character.
Yeah, I can't say I had any particular problem with her acting, and it's a fairly vapid role, and but it serves a purpose just to...
At best, I would say, but there's a few moments where it's oh, that's not great acting there.
No, I can't say I had any problem with her.
But I think this is the start of something that we may be talking about as we continue Christopher Nolan's career. I'm interested to see how well Christopher Nolan writes women, because I've got a hunch that on the rewatch here, it might just be an issue of he's not great at female characters.
I mean, he does make, I guess, masculine films, whatever that means. It does feel like films that are...
cold and emotionless.
Yeah,
films.
I guess that's what it comes down to, isn't it? Yeah.
The one time he tried to make an overtly emotional film, which was Interstellar, it pissed off a lot of people too. So, yeah, I wouldn't expect that to change.
Yeah, which is obviously just how he approaches things. I think that's okay. There's a place for that.
Yeah, it's fine. It's not as...
He does it well.
Not everyone has to make a soppy, saccharine bit of emotion every time. It's fine. It's a place for cold, hard films with very bleak stories. It's fine.
Yeah.
We've not mentioned... We also have Morgan Freeman in here.
Oh, yeah.
He's
Fox.
really good in this. I like the Lucius Fox character. They're obviously building a franchise here, but they don't make too much of him. I thought they could have made more of him, and I'm kind of happy with that because you've got enough going on, and you've got Alfred for the emotional side. Lucius doesn't have that at first, at least, you know.
He's the tech guy, essentially, and he's Q.
He's Q, yeah.
But it works really nicely.
And he brings a bit of humour. He's a bit of a cheeky chappy.
Yeah, exactly. And Morgan Freeman's got that twinkle in his eye that just sells everything.
I want to know more about how he ended up there and what trouble he caused, and I quite like that in a character.
That's something we should probably mention, actually. Another thing Christopher Nolan is often criticised for is a lack of humour. And I think that's true here, that there's some moments of attempted humour in this film.
Yeah, some real misfires.
Very weak, very bad jokes in this film. Like, real first draft placeholder quips that somehow made it into the finished production. Like when Gordon sees the Batmobile. And the line
got to get me one of those. Oh, no.
This particularly struck me in the Batmobile chase sequence, where it just felt really dated. But I think it was because it kept intercutting to a policeman going,
"He is in a vehicle.
Make and color?
It's a black tank.
He's not on the streets. He's jumping across the ceiling."
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. They also had a wonderful bit that I enjoyed, and I'm not criticising this, but where the is it security guard? He's like drinking a cup of coffee, and then the Batmobile goes flying past, and then he like looks at the coffee like, "Hey,
good old
what's
double
in
take.
this drink?" Which, as listeners will know, I'm a big fan of that exact joke, and I think it should be in every film.
I liked the bit where he turned the lights off and everyone lost him, including the helicopter with a spotlight on it.
Yeah,
what the fuck?
Literally just turns the headlights off and they're like, "Oh, he's disappeared. What's going on?"
Ghost car!
He even says go into stealth mode and then just turns the headlight off. What?
Like, none of the film is particularly realistic, but it's based within mostly realism, and then that just ruins everything.
But I mean, I must say there's some weak stuff in there from a filmmaking point of view as well. There's a bit where it cuts to, obviously, Ra's al Ghul's his evil plan is to use this microwave weapon that vaporizes water. And then it just cuts to, like, a character that I don't think we've established at this point in, like, the water plant HQ, who just says, like, "If this water here meets critical mass, like it is doing now, then it's gonna blow up the entire city!" And then it just cuts away again.
Two
it's
guys
like,
in
who was
there,
that?
There's like an old guy and a young guy, and the young guy is the guy from Following. He's the main guy from Following, isn't he?
Oh, is it?
Yeah. He goes,
that.
"Oh my god, the pressure's spiking!" And I was like, "Oh god, that's a terrible London accent. What's going on?" And looked him up, and it's the guy from Following.
Makes sense.
But, you know, all little weak, rough around the edges things aside, and, you know, I'm willing to chalk a degree of those up to teething problems with the superhero genre finding its feet. All of that aside, I think, you know, what a vision here. To bring Gotham to life in such a vivid way, you know, it's Chicago, isn't it, that they film this in, I believe.
It does look spectacular, especially the Narrows. It's got a really good feel to it.
And it's, Gotham is typically, it's really more of a New York analogy as far as I know, isn't it? Oh no, is that Metropolis? Am I?
No, I always I know they're both in the DC, but I always see Gotham as New York. Certainly the dark side of New York rather than the tourist.
Yeah, it's 80s New York.
Glitzy side of New York. Yeah.
Yeah, and so to kind of not think, hey, we're going to film it in New York. It's, it's quite visionary. And that's what Christopher Nolan is, I guess he knows what he's going for and knows how to get it. And this is a great example of it. It's a, visually really strong film. The cinematography, the visual style that they've kind of been developing, him and Wally Pfister over the course of their careers is really coming into its own now. And, it's very professionally put together action sequences. It's a really triumphant leap into proper blockbuster filmmaking territory, I think. Yeah, I mean, I like I say, when we did this film back in the day, I gave it a 7 out of 10, and I'd like to bump that back up to an 8, which is what I used to have it as. I think it's a very respectable bit of work.
I mean, I stayed on a 7. Definitely, it was, and the usual sort of pitfalls as far as I'm concerned. Half an hour too long, like 20 minutes too much of a car chase. It's just, I appreciate there's a sense of personal taste there, and that whole opening section was too loose. And basically, it's just,
a bit.
It was
baggy.
Fine. Yeah,
I agree.
7 out of 10.
Yeah, there's definitely issues with it for me. I think the length is actually quite reasonable when you bear in mind that they've got a full story and sort of a partial origin. But I do think it sets up nicely for the later films. I definitely think that was a thought process. Yeah. But it's an 8 for me. There's definitely issues with it. It's not a perfect film by any stretch, but a really, really good, well put together film. I think it did a lot, and I think it, like we said at the beginning, it's sort of ushered in a huge amount of change within cinema and certainly superhero films. So it's 8.
Nice.
And that 8 that I've given that film there has an impact on my directorial filmography ranking list. Christopher Nolan, he was number 10. He's now up to number 7.
Ooh,
wow. Doesn't take much.
Pushed him up. He has an average score of 8 out of 10. It used to be 7.9, but that Batman Begins score has pushed it up to an 8. So there you go. How's that going to break down for the following weeks? It's obviously going to be quite positive. So next week we are going to be continuing this. We've structured this around the Batman trilogy, the Dark Knight trilogy, just because each one seems to, as things stand, kind of be part of a separate third of Chris Nolan's career. I think Batman Begins is very much the end of the beginning of his career, and The Dark Knight is very much the confident middle portion. So next week we'll be doing that with The Prestige, The Dark Knight and Inception.
Yep. Okay. Join us next week for more Christopher Nolan discussion. Thank you, Brear, for helping us out this week.
No, thank you
ever so much.
It's good to speak to you both.
Yes. So
Likewise.
Come back next week. Bye.